Good evening and welcome to the information session for the Cumberland County Community Impact Grant Program. Some of you may have participated in a similar program with Cumberland County in the past, so you may have already seen my face before or worked with me. So this session will provide some new information, but many of the elements that you'll hear tonight will be familiar to you from previous sessions and previous programs. Those of you who are on the call and those of you who may come on, welcome again to the information session. If you have colleagues or folks in the nonprofit community who you knew wanted to be a part of this but were not able to participate, this information session will be recorded and it will be posted to the county website as well as our county YouTube channel, and will likely periodically screen on our county TV channel, which is CCNCTV. Before we jump into the presentation, I want to introduce myself. My name is Ty Vaught. I am the County Chief of Staff, and I'm currently also serving as the Interim Community Development Director. And with me today, I have two staff. I have with me Rayshana Manuel, who is a finance accountant with the county, who also works as the accountant for this program, as well as the interim business manager for the Community Development Department. And we have with us as well Mr. Cedric Turner, who is a strategic project analyst with the American Rescue Plan program, who will be also working with this program as we move forward. So this application is already open. It opened this past Friday, and it will remain open until April 1st to give adequate time for participants to apply and to make sure that you have adequate time to make sure your applications are sufficiently completed. The Community Impact Grant, like other programs in Cumberland County, we administer this program as a reimbursement-based grant program. What that means is that typically expenditures are incurred from the organization in one of the allowable categories per the contract, and then at a monthly interval, bi-weekly interval, as those expenditures come in, the vendor will submit invoices and documentation to county staff for reimbursement. There are several ways that we do that. So when we get to the contracting phase, if we get to that phase with your organization, we'll talk more about it and give you more information. But just as a broad statement, we operate our programs based on a reimbursement basis. And so we're going to jump into a brief presentation. And after that presentation, we will answer any questions that you may have. You are welcome to put your questions into the question function throughout this evening session, and we will answer questions in the order that they are received. If something is pertinent that we do not cover or a particular question is not asked, please feel free to email program staff at cign@cumberlandcountync.gov. Just make sure that you put CIG question in the subject line to ensure that you receive a prompt response. After the session, we will put together a frequently asked questions or FAQ document that will be uploaded to the program page. That will include answers to questions asked this evening with greater detail, as well as questions staff come across. This session is also being recorded and will be available to view on the county website under the Community Impact Grant Program tab, the county's YouTube channel, and will stream periodically on the county's television channel, CCNCTV. We will break this evening session into two sections, the first being the presentation and then a time for Q&A. We will start with the program overview and then touch on the purpose of funds, the program approach. Then we will walk through the sections of the application, talk about eligible budget categories, and then end on the application review criteria. The Community Impact Grant Program was discussed and proposed by the Cumberland County Board of Commissioners American Rescue Plan Ad Hoc Committee. The committee is made up of Vice Chairwoman Commissioner Veronica Jones, who also chairs the committee, and Commissioners Dr. Jeanette Council and Pavan Patel. The proposed program and funding allocation were presented to the full Board of County Commissioners on Monday, February 17th, 2025, and was approved unanimously. The purpose of this program and the use of funding allocation is intended to specifically assist tax-exempt organizations in Cumberland County that perform one or more of the following core functions. The first one is health and human services organizations, nonprofits providing mental health support, substance abuse treatment, food assistance, homelessness prevention, domestic violence, and domestic violence shelters, and other essential social services. Next, we have religious and faith-based organizations, churches, faith-based community or outreach programs, and religious nonprofits that provide food distribution, emergency assistance, or identified other public purpose. Now, I want to clarify, it is not sufficient that your organization, a religious organization, provide clergy-led worship services. They would also need to provide one of those prior stated services as well. Next, we have public safety and emergency response organizations, volunteer fire departments, EMS organizations, and nonprofit disaster response entities supporting public safety and emergency preparedness. Educational and youth development organizations, nonprofits providing services to at-risk youth, after-school programs, mentorship, vocational training, literacy programs, and other educational initiatives. And last, we have arts, culture, and community development organizations. These are nonprofits focused on preserving local arts, cultural heritage, and supporting economic revitalization and community development projects. Since Cumberland County has committed to investing these funds into nonprofit organizations, this is the approach that we are taking in our review of applications. In part, we are looking to see if funding for organizations will support improved outcomes for the most impacted populations. Are the funds being utilized for a public purpose as described in North Carolina General Statute 160D 1311A2 and other applicable general statutes, while also meeting one or more of the 5 objectives covered in the previous slide? Also, comply with all provisions of any funding contract, and most importantly, have a lasting impact. The application has multiple sections that include an overview, application submission requirements, organization information, organization description, proposed use of funds, which includes the budget, conflicts of interest, acknowledgement of required assurances, certification, and submission and review. In the overview section, we discussed the purpose of the Community Impact Grant Program and its attachment to general statute. All applicants must be determined eligible to be awarded funding through the program, which means that an application does not guarantee approval of funding. We ask that you complete all applicable sections of the application. Many of these sections are labeled with a red asterisk, which means that a response or attachment is required. Under project scope, it states that the program provides up to $50,000 in financial assistance. But again, a request for a particular dollar amount does not guarantee that level of funding. Through the review process, we may determine that an application will not be funded for a particular reason, which will be provided to the applicant. A recommendation may be made to fund the application for a lesser amount than what was asked for by the applicant, or the application may be funded at the amount that was asked. You will notice that the 5 categories that we previously covered are referenced here again. In the application submission requirement section, it includes areas to upload for several attachments. These include your organization's articles of incorporation, which you likely have a copy of, but if you don't, you can find it on the North Carolina Secretary of State's website. Also, ensure that your organization's annual report is up to date. We are not able to move forward with organizations that are delinquent, suspended, or administratively dissolved. You will also attach your tax-exempt status letter that you would have received from the Internal Revenue Service. If you do not have a copy of this, you will need to reach out to the IRS to receive a duplicate copy. You will also attach your most recently filed Form 990 or applicable documentation if you do not file Form 990. You will also attach a current W-9 with your organization's legal name that was signed within the past 12 months. Cumberland County's Finance Department requires that all W-9s be less than a year old. So my recommendation is that you sign a W-9 the day you submit your application to ensure it does not expire throughout the process. And finally, you will submit any general liability insurance policies associated with your organization and/or any required licensing or certifications associated with the type of organization that you run. In the organization's information section, it is pretty self-explanatory. You will include your organization's legal name. It is not required, but if your organization has an assumed name or doing business as DBA that is registered with the NC Secretary of State, you can include that name as well. You will include your organization's mailing address, the telephone number of the program contact, and their email. You will also include your federal EIN number and your incorporation date. You can find your federal EIN number on your IRS tax exempt form, and you can find your incorporation date on the NC Secretary of State's website on your articles of incorporation. There's a question that asks, are you a nonprofit? I hope the answer to this question is yes. There's also a location to put your organization's website if you have one, though it is not required. The name of your organization's executive director, their contact number, and their email will also be included. And just to be clear, this person may or may not be the contact for the program, but would need to be involved as the authorized signer if the application advances to the contracting phase. Please include any and all board members and their contact numbers and/or emails. This is important to our staff in the event that we are unable to reach the contact person or the executive director. You will answer if your organization is currently in bankruptcy, if there are any current criminal or civil fines or penalties associated with your organization, if your organization also exists at a physical location, do you own the building or do you rent? And then finally, what type of insurance does your organization carry? Next, we move to the organization description. This may be one of the 2 most important sections of the application because we will use this to create a scope of work for the terms of your contract. You will notice that we again included the 5 objective areas for your reference. There are 2 questions in this section that need to be answered in sufficient detail. The first being, describe the nature of your organization, including its mission, goals, and relevant experiences or qualifications that make your organization uniquely suited to provide the intended services. And to reiterate, those services need to tie back to one or more of the 5 objectives covered under the public purposes. The more descriptive you're able to be, the better. The second question, please provide a detailed description of the services that will be provided by your organization upon funding approval. Be sure to include sufficient methods to measure the services that will be delivered to the intended recipients. Please also provide clear information about the number of individuals, the age range, or any other relevant demographics of the individuals that the services will be provided to, as well as a clear timeline for when the services will be provided. As an example, I included this statement. We will provide 2 hours of after-school tutoring in STEM subjects to 16 students enrolled at Cumberland Road Middle School in grades 6 through 8 for 3 days each week while school is in session. Though you will write more than that, that's an example of the level of detail we will need to produce a scope of work. Again, the more information and the more descriptive that you're able to be, the better. The proposed use of funds section is the second most important part of the application because it encompasses the budget. You can click on the budget template and it will download an Excel spreadsheet that you'll be able to type directly into. There's also a question in this section that asks if you have received or applied for any federal, state, or local aid within the past 6 months. If you've received aid beyond the 6-month period, but are still drawing from that funding source or it's still active, please click yes as well. If you click no, you'll move directly to the next section. But if you click yes, a table will expand for you to include those funding sources and the amounts. So why is it important that you include this information? And will it impact your ability to be considered for funding under the Community Impact Program? The answer is it depends. No, receiving other funding does not automatically disqualify your organization from receiving Community Impact Grant funds, but it does mean that we will have to determine if funding your application for the particular budget items you've requested will trigger a duplication of benefits. And as a simple example of duplication of benefits, we could say, for example, uh, you received federal grant funds to cover salaries for, let's say, a behavioral health specialist for the months of January through March. But then you applied for another program, and in that program, you were also awarded for funding to cover the same salaries for the same the same number of months. And so that would then trigger, that would be a duplication of benefits because you have already received reimbursement for those same salaries. Uh, and I will mention that if you have received funding from Cumberland County for any other program, staff reserves the right to conduct a desk review or a monitoring within the performance period to ensure that that duplication of benefits has not taken place. And just as a reference, this next slide shows the categories for which nonprofits can request funding. When you open up the Excel workbook, you will notice a tab or page for each one of these categories, uh, and each will have its own tab or page to fill in details for each one of your requests. General information like employee is not sufficient for these categories, putting, let's say, employee and then 40 hours and percentage, that wouldn't be sufficient. We would need to go into more detail about potentially the employee's name, their position. Let's say it's a behavioral health specialist. If they're being funded through multiple programs, you would actually show what percentage they're being paid from that other program and this program. You don't have to get into too much detail on the other program, but for example, if they are being funded 60% from another state, federal, local program, you would then say that 40% of that salary is being funded through the community impact grant, and so on. Also, I would like to mention that the final page of this workbook, we ask that you do not manipulate that page. It looks like what's on your screen right now. This page is formulated to calculate in total what is inputted into the individual cost item tabs. So you don't need to touch it. By putting in the figures into the other tabs, it will populate this page and give us a grand total summary. Also, please keep in mind your budget request cannot exceed 50,000. And so please be mindful of that. Just check and make sure that your totals do not exceed 50,000 because we cannot consider requests that exceed the $50,000 cap. And as previously stated, just because you request a particular dollar amount up to $50,000, it is not guaranteed that you will receive that amount in funding. This is why it's important that you are descriptive with your budget request and you itemize the items. An itemized budget list is easier to scale up or down, and a general budget that is not itemized is much more difficult to work with. And we take that into account while we are scoring and evaluating applications. Very briefly, in the conflicts of interest acknowledgement of required assurances section, we cover the definition of a conflict of interest, which references that no employees may participate in the selection, award, or administration of any program that he or she possesses a real, apparent conflict of interest. This is defined further in 2 CFR 200:13C(L) and also in Cumberland County Personnel Ordinance Section 501C. Under the required assurances, we ask that you read through this section as an executed application will serve as your acknowledgement and agreement to adhere to each one of these acknowledgements. The certification section is the final section in which you will agree to the language above and your application. And in summary, just to reiterate, the eligible categories for funding include personnel, fringe benefits, travel, equipment and other capital, materials and supplies, contractual services, consultant services, occupancy, which can include rent and utilities for the organization's property, not personal property, telecommunications, which would include things like phone and internet, again, for the organization property or their mission and not personal property, training, education, and other operating. And the other operating section is very rarely used, and we keep it there for this reason. We encourage that you use one of the other categories, but if you're just not able to fit a particular funding ask or item or category into one of the other categories, then of course you can use the other section uh, to evaluate that particular cost item. And before we jump into our discussion Q&A phase, just as food for thought, these are some of the questions staff will be attempting to answer while reviewing your application. Does your organization and your program perform a public purpose as we have defined here? Is your organization adhering to the IRS tax requirements and the filing mandates? Is your organization registered and in good standing with the NC Secretary of State? Does your organization carry sufficient general liability insurance and or possess the appropriate certifications or licensing? And finally, is the application complete? Incomplete applications will not move forward. We encourage you to get your application in as soon as possible, and though it is your responsibility to ensure your application is complete, if staff determines that an application is incomplete before the deadline, we'll be happy to reach out to you to let you know that we need more information and we will get that from you. But just remember, as we get closer to the deadline, it becomes increasingly more difficult for us to do that, reach out, and then get that information before the deadline ends. So we encourage you to be as thorough and complete as you can as you fill out your application. And this question may come up a little bit later. Unfortunately, no, we are not able to save applications, and so they do have to be completed either in one sitting, or if you come back to it, you have to leave the actual tab open on your browser while you're filling it out. So thank you all for sitting through that presentation. I tried to be as comprehensive as I could be, but of course, I know that I can't answer everything in that kind of in a hyperbolic chamber. And so at this time, we want to open up to any questions that there may be, clarifications or questions beyond that. And so I'll start taking questions.
Yes, the first question is, does the application for the Community Impact Grant impact a 2025 request for funding through Cumberland County Community Funding?
So I think that's a great question. So the question was, does an application to the Community Impact Program impact a funding request through the budget process with the Community Funding Program? And so not directly. And so these programs are separate programs. This program is a program, like I said, that was stood up by the American Rescue Plan Ad Hoc Committee and approved by the Board for Funding. And community funding is something that the county does each year throughout the budget process. The way that requests have been handled in past years is if a program applies to either program or both programs, either a decision is made between both programs to fund either through the programs. For example, if you ask for $30,000 in community funding and you ask for $30,000 in this type of program, it goes back to the duplication of benefits. If those cost items don't overlap, or they do overlap, a decision is then made by the committee and the board to fund through either program. But there is capacity in some cases when the requests are not the same request. And so, for example, again, not causing a duplication of benefits, you have one funding ask that does not overlap with another funding ask, then that would not automatically determine the application ineligible, but it would still be a decision made by the Board of Commissioners if they're going to fund either one or both of those programs. I hope that's kind of jumbled. I was trying to think through my answer, but I hope that answers the question.
The next question is this different than CDBG funding?
This is different from, that's a good question too. Great question. So this program is funded with general funds. And so this is separate from any type of public service contract that an organization would have with community development, the CDBG program. And it kind of speaks to the same question that we just had with community funding. And so I'll just ask the question or put it back out there. Could somebody, for example, apply for CDBG funding and then also apply for this program? It's not an automatic no, but it would go back to we would have to look at, is the application or the funding request going to cause a duplication of benefits? And again, a decision will be made amongst the evaluators and ultimately the folks who are going to ultimately award the funding, but automatically on its face, if the ask are not the same ask, then there is potential there that two separate funding requests could be funded.
The next question is, am I to understand that any grant I apply for must be included?
Yes, so there is the question there that asks, have you received or applied for any local, state, or federal funding within the past 6 months? And so the reason why we ask it that way is because just like this program, you may have applied, but you have not received verification or acknowledgement that you've been awarded or not funded either way, but you could be. And so maybe today you're applying for this program and you don't have any other funding sources, but 2-3 months from now, maybe you're awarded through 3 different programs. And so we need to evaluate and make sure that it's fine that you received awards through other programs, but if you've asked for the same type of cost items or the same thing within those programs, it goes back to my statement about duplication of benefits. We have to ensure that we did not cause a duplication of benefits.
The next question is, does Title I, Title II, Title IV funds count as aid from the state or federal in the last 6 months?
I would include it because what we're looking at is not particularly the entity that funded it, whether, like I said, it could be state, federal, local, or some other type of endowment, grant funds. It could be anything. Our focus is looking at, are we funding the same cost items? So I go back to my previous example during the PowerPoint when I said that you applied for, let's use CDBG Public Services. If Public Services funded, for example, staff salaries for 2 staff members to cover a 6-month period, let's say it covers from July 2025 to December 2025 or January 2026. But then you're awarded funding through this program for salary for 2 staff that covers July 2025 through January 2026. Now we've caused a duplication of benefits. And so it's less important about what the program is called or who funded it. It's more about what was funded and did it cause a duplication of benefits. And I hate to sound like a broken record, but you'll probably get the theme that the biggest focus is not really, and that's why I said it's not a matter of can you apply because you have other programs. That's fine. Many nonprofits, many organizations operate off of multiple funding sources, but the focus really is about are these multiple funding sources funding the same thing and causing a duplication of benefits?
Is there a timeline/window for the program to be in?
Okay, so I take that question to me. I'll answer it. I'm going to add on to that question and answer 2 timelines. So the application period for this particular program is from now through April 1st. And so you're able to apply between now and April 1st. Then we will go through the evaluation review period. It will come to back to the original committee to make review, for them to review it as well. And then ultimately it will go to the Board of Commissioners for final approval of those funding conditional award letters. The actual execution date of the contract phase will be effective July 1, 2025. And so because this program is being funded through general fund dollars, it will run from July 1st, 2025 through June 30th, 2026, which will encompass the whole of fiscal year 2026.
The next question is, occupancy was a funding area. Is occupancy rent?
Yes, so that's a good question. So occupancy typically covers rental payments and or utilities. And so, and I made a distinction during the presentation, the PowerPoint, that it's important that we ascertain that the property that we are reimbursing rent payments for is the organization's operating location. And I know this may be another question that somebody's thinking about. So if I operate the organization mainly out of my home, can I charge my rent payments from my home, my apartment? No, you cannot. So there's a standalone entity or organizational building that you pay for and you pay monthly rent. We can consider that request. We can consider the utilities for that particular building unit, that commercial office building unit. So that would be something that would be available for funding, but it would not cover any type of personal property.
The next question is approximately how long does it take to acquire reimbursement?
So to be kind to staff, because we try to move quickly, but I'm sure you can appreciate that we could have tens multiple of people under the program at one time, and so we could potentially have 25 to 30 or more entities that we're reimbursing in one given month. And so we ask that you limit your reimbursement requests at least to monthly, to give us time to process it, because it has to go through a workflow. And so it has to be reviewed by staff for completeness, and then it will go through the workflow, ultimately going throughout our finance department, and then being sent finally to our accounts payable section within our finance department to issue the payment. And so we'll be working with everybody if you make it to the contract phase. What we have found over the years that works the best is if we can set up your organization on EFT as opposed to check, and then things tend to move more regularly when we have it set up that way. But we do ask that you limit your reimbursement requests to once a month, to give us adequate time to kind of cycle through and make sure everybody's having attention paid to them and getting their reimbursements timely.
The next question is, so to be clear, as long as you don't have overlapping expenses in the budget, you would be eligible to receive awards from both community impacts and community funding streams pending approval?
That's correct. And so, of course, I'm not at liberty to say whether a particular organization will be approved or not, but the focus that we would have from this program is based on the duplication of benefits. And then, of course, with the community funding during the budget process, as the Board of Commissioners reviews and they make their funding decisions, they will make the decision that they see fit as a board. But it would not automatically preclude you from applying or being considered because you applied to both programs. But again, we will be looking for, are there duplications in those funding requests?
The next question is, what should the time frame of our programs be?
So you want to make sure that your program falls within that fiscal year, and so you don't want to get outside of FY26, which again concludes on June 30th, 2026, and you really don't want to get that close to the end of the program year anyway, and then be at risk of, for example, of the contract being the PO being dissolved because we got so close to the end of the year. And so going back to, I want to say it was the organization description section in the PowerPoint, that's why we talked about, provide us a timeline of when you expect to administer these programs / services, so we can work with you there to make sure that whatever you're conceiving to do within that program year, that it's realistic and we can fit it into that program. Or if you need some help from the staff here, we've been doing this for a while, and so we may be able to opine and give you some information or some guidance on how to do that to make sure that it falls within that 12 month fiscal year performance period.
The next question is, we do not have any liability insurance. However, would a charitable solicitation license suffice, since we solicit furnishings from the community and provide it to those in need?
So typically what is required is that for us, what we're looking for in a general liability policy is to make sure that you carry sufficient liability to cover at least the amount of your funding award. And the goal is not to claw back funding or to do anything like of that nature, but we have to make sure that in the event that there is an issue, like there was a duplication of benefits, I keep saying that, a duplication of benefits, and we have to, for example, do a clawback because we've determined there was a duplication. There needs to be some assurance there that there is existing funding or funding available in order to recoup those funds that were expended through duplication. And so we do actually require that you carry at least a policy that covers the amount of your funding award. And I'll just be transparent. In times past, we have worked with entities. So typically, just kind of showing you behind the curtain, once a request for funding goes and is approved by the Board of County Commissioners, what the applicant will receive is a conditional award letter. And in that conditional award letter, there will be items there that are outstanding for each of the applicants. And so it may say something like, based on your application, this was sufficient, and we had enough sufficient information to recommend your program move forward. But before we can execute the contract and award the funding, we need these things. And so, if, for example, it may be one of those things that, hey, you didn't know how much you would receive, I need some time to get this policy generated, for example. That could be something that we could do. And so if you're applying and you don't have it today, it's not a hard stop, but it would be something that you would need to consider if you are considered or conditionally awarded for the funding.
The last day to submit an application is April 1st.
That is correct. April 1st will be the last day to submit an application. And I'll reiterate something I said before during the presentation. I know that some folks have more experience filling out applications, federal grants. People have different levels of experience doing these types of things. And so we don't expect that every application that comes in is going to be perfect. They all may be, but we don't expect that. And that's why I encourage folks to get their applications in earlier and timely. So if something does come in and we're able to screen it, then we can say, hey, this is missing a budget, or this is not sufficient information, or they started talking about this but really didn't flesh it out. We need to get more understanding on this. That gives us time to reach back out to you and say, hey, can you provide us X, Y, and Z? But if you wait, for example, until, let's say, March 31st to apply, or April 1st, it's much more difficult for us to turn around and say, hey, we need this, because applying on March 31st or April 1st, we may not have a chance to look at or review your application for completeness until April 3rd, April 4th, April 5th, which would be past the deadline date. And so to not cause an issue like that, where it's almost like a clerical error on the application, we want to get them in early to make sure that we can review for completeness and then, be your advocate basically in this process to make sure that what is being evaluated, whichever way it goes, is a complete application, so that you're not being, for example, denied funding or I'll use the word denied on the basis that you did not submit a complete application.
The next question is, what about program funding that does not cover the entire cost of the program, like employee costs or indirect expenses that are directly related to program expenses that are greater than the initial program funding?
So if I understand the question correctly, I understand that question to be, if there is a program, let's say it's an existing program or a new program, and the program costs exceed the allowable funding or grant for this program. That goes back to when we were talking about the budget piece on the proposed use of funds. So unfortunately, we're not able to award contracts beyond the $50,000 threshold. And so it may be a situation where if you don't have other funding sources to fund a program, then you need to scale that program to the dollar amount that can be covered in the program. But if you have other funding sources and you can expand that program, then you would actually just include the percentage spread for this program. And going back to my previous example in the PowerPoint, if I'm running a behavioral health program and I have a behavioral health specialist, and this person's salary each year by itself may be, let's say, $60,000. Well, that one salary by itself exceeds the allowable funding for this program. And so if you want to get make sure you spread that award throughout, you may fund that salary, let's say 70% from this other funding source through donations, another program, and then maybe 30% comes from this program. And so that's something that you would have to determine on your side if you have the capacity to fund a program solely with the use of these funds, the funds that you're awarded through the Community Impact Program. But if not, you would definitely want to ensure that you're able to fund, fill that stopgap with other funding from another program or donations or what have you, other funding sources in your organization.
Will we be notified if we're not selected?
Yes. So we will go through the process, and so we reach out to everybody. And so you should, as you apply, you should get emails from the CIGN@CumberlandCountyNC.gov email letting you know your application was received. You'll receive correspondence from that email as well if anything needs to be changed or updated. And then once we make determinations, as staff determinations, committee determinations, board determinations, each individual will receive correspondence, a letter, typically through email, but we have been known to do it through mail if requested. If your program was funded, and you'll get a conditional award letter at some point once it's approved. If it was not funded, we will actually explain to you why it was not funded. And so there's not a grievance structure for this program, but we do want to make sure that we get out those letters for individuals to know why they weren't funded. And though there is not a grievance program, if there is a outright misstatement that was overlooked or something like that, then please let us know so we can look at that and give it due diligence and give it the appropriate attention. But typically there's not a grievance procedure or process for this. But we will notify each and every individual either way, whether your program was funded or if it was not.
Will we be allowed to use funding to purchase snacks or food for individuals in the program?
It depends on the program. And so I'm just going to use an example. If your program, for example, was related to after school or child care or youth, at-risk youth or something like that, then it's not unusual to have after-school snacks or things like that in your program. Or if you're doing some type of day program with individuals, it wouldn't be unusual to have refreshments, things like that within reason. We may not be able to fund a 4-course meal or a steak dinner, but things like snacks for those types of programs, those are typically reasonable costs. But those are things that you would itemize in your budget and give good information on, detailed information on why you're asking for things like food items. And so I will talk a little bit while people are putting questions into the chat. I just want to say that as you go throughout the month and you're applying or you're looking at your application, trying to pull information together, you'll probably see updates on our website. Again, you will see an FAQ, and so I'm not perfect, and sometimes when I'm on the spot, I will say things in the moment and that are not as clear as I intend them to be. And so sometimes I will go, well, all the time I will go back and rewatch or reread questions, after some time and say, hey, I should have said this, or let me give more context to this. And so when you read the FAQs, they will be much more detailed than what I'm speaking live right now, and I'll give time and credit to each question to make sure that we thoroughly answer each one of the questions. And so I just want to make sure that if I've answered a question that was a two-part question, I might have missed one of the sections of the question, don't fret. I will get that question, I will answer it completely and have it in the FAQ, as well as, again, this recording will be available on the county website. And so some of you may have registered for this webinar through our press release, and some of you may have actually registered through the county website. And so if you go to the Cumberland County NC.gov website, on the very first title page, you'll see a tile there that says Community Impact Grant. If you click that, there's two sections, application and virtual information session. Right now, you will see a link there to register for this session. Within the next day or so, that link will disappear, and there will be a link there that will take you to this recorded session, so you can watch it live, watch the recording, as well as underneath that, the FAQ with today's questions, and then also we will include questions in there that staff thought about before and after this session, or something that I come up with. I'm like, hey, I think this would be really, really beneficial or pertinent to folks who are, as they do their applications. And so we will include that as well. But the application, again, will stay on the website until April 1st, and I'll say close of business. And so we'll say April 1st at 5 p.m. So right now there are no questions in the chat, and so I'll give a couple more moments. I'll ask Ms. Manuel or Mr. Turner if there's any questions that they think that we should cover that maybe weren't asked in the chat or not covered in the PowerPoint. Anything from you all?
We just got a question in.
Just got a question, okay.
It says, I don't have an office to operate out of. Will facility rentals, will that be covered?
So, good question. So if I understand that question correctly, you don't currently have a lease for a facility, but you're looking for potentially this program to fund a lease for you in order to operate in. That's something that we have done before as well. So that's a depends as well. We could potentially do that. What I would recommend, though, is that if we're going to fund a program, we have to know what the cost is within the budget scope. And so if you already are in the process of looking for or know where you're going to be, if you can get that information into the budget template, we can consider that. But then, of course, the recommendation would be as well, if that lease for that property is a 6-month lease to a year lease, you want to make sure that you are planning your funding request to either, partially or fully cover the cost of whatever that lease term is for that 6 months of the year. Because, of course, you don't want to find yourself in a situation where you're in a lease, but then your funding source is depleted, either throughout the program or another funding source, and then you're in a situation where you're stuck in a lease. And so that will be something to consider, but short answer is yes, but I would just make sure that I pull that information together as soon as possible to make sure that it's covered in your budget proposal. So I'll give it a couple more moments to any more questions. I'll ask the question to the group. Is there anything and I want to apologize too. I know some folks I was hearing during the presentation had some issues hearing the presentation. I believe those issues will be taken care of once the recording is posted. But basically, I just wanted to make, the purpose of the presentation was I wanted to take the time to walk through each section, because I know sometimes people don't put in applications or proposals for programs because the process can seem daunting. But we've done similar programs like this over the past 4 years now. And there was a time when the application was like 17 pages long, and we've worked diligently to make those applications as concise as possible and only ask questions that are pertinent to making recommendations. And so I just wanted to kind of show everybody that the application was not, a daunting task. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out.
Yes, we have one more question. It is asking, is the application to fill in the blank? If not, how many pages are recommended?
I'm sorry, ask it one more time.
Is the application fill in the blank? If not, how many pages are recommended?
Yes, it is. Yes. So that's a very good question. So those are what you saw on the page. If you have not seen the application in real time, what you saw on the presentation were screenshots of each section. And so I screenshotted just the questions on I would assume that you're asking about the organization description page. Under those questions are text boxes. And so I think it allows like 20,000 characters, and so you will not run out of space. And you can just type directly into that. But I'm not opposed to, I have had folks in the past, because they work, I guess, better typing things into a Word document, so on and so forth. You could send that to us or type it into a Word document, copy and paste into the actual text box. I prefer it in the text box because we're able to see things in one place. But if you feel like it's so much information that needs to be captured another way, then we can be amenable. We're amenable to you submitting it through like a Word document. Okay. So we're getting close to time, and I'm going to reserve these last 2 minutes to hold off for any questions. But as we close out, I want to say thank you so much. We try to do these information sessions in the evenings because we want to be sensitive to everyone's schedule. We know that those of you, all of you who are in the nonprofit sector, you work long hours. And you work after hours, and so it's never a good time to get you all on a call to discuss these types of programs. But I wanted to make sure that we were sensitive to at least do this after the regular business hours. And again, this is recorded and will be available for viewing in perpetuity. So if you want to see me talk again for an hour, you're welcome to view it again. And again, also, if your question did not make it into the chat and you think of something later, please email us at cign@cumberlandcountync.gov, and in the subject line, put CIG question. That email box is only for this program, but we get a lot of emails there, and so if we see CIG question, that will alert us that it's related to this information session, and so we'll try to prioritize that subject line to get you a quick response. But regardless, whatever you say in that email, we will probably turn around. We will wash it of any personal identifying information or anything that links it to your organization, but we're going to steal it and we're going to use it in our FAQ because likely somebody else had the same question and just hasn't asked it yet. So it is now the 7 o'clock hour. Thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to seeing your applications come in, and we will be in touch. Thank you and have a great evening.